What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm the Crockneck, and I am back with yet another States of Metal. And today, we are going to Tornado's favorite vacation spot, or technically maybe second favorite vacation spot, with Kansas. Yet another state that does have a smaller metal scene, but it definitely has bands that I want to bring up. But of course, I want to go over what I know about Kansas. And, well, I've already alluded to the first thing, which is tornadoes. Next to Texas, it has more tornadoes than any other state in the United States. I have watched tons of tornado footage, and believe me, Kansas comes up quite often. I was always kind of shocked at, Wizard of Oz when, Dorothy's family saw the tornado coming. They acted like they were shocked. I figured if it was a little bit more accurate, they'd be just like, well, that's like the third time this week. Hell, I honestly don't see a lot of people just bolt for the storm cellar. It's honestly just people that go outside and yeah, I'm gonna fucking record this and put it on YouTube. Same goes for Ohio, though, if I'm being completely honest. The band Kansas is from Kansas, but oddly enough, Kansas City technically isn't, because the bulk of it is in Missouri, and then kind of a suburb of it is Kansas City, Kansas, just across the river. I always thought that was confusing, and I'm pretty sure anyone outside of the States is probably thinking, why would they do that? Well, my answer is simply, this is the US, and we just kind of do things whether or not they make sense or not. The state was actually named after the Kansa tribe of the Sioux Nation, which I believe translates to South Wind People, and that is in no way a reference to farts, which I was kind of disappointed by. Now, when it came down to statehood, this one was kind of like a battleground. Initially, when it was a territory, it was a big fight between pro-slavery groups and anti-slavery groups. They were constantly going at each other's throats and actually probably killing each other. I'm sure the Sioux Nation was absolutely thrilled with their new asshole neighbors, but they were probably even less thrilled when it came down to the state's actual statehood. This was a period where the government would throw out homestead acts, which essentially were just encouraging people to move out west, and you could just go out there, plant a stake in the ground, and that would be yours, despite other people living there. That's honestly how a lot of U.S. history goes in terms of the expansion. We just kind of take it. It's ours because we put a stick in the ground. Anyway, outside of that, this is the surprising home of both Pizza Hut and White Castle. They both originated there. And this is also the home of the world's largest ball of twine, which I only know because of National Lampoon's Vacation. I don't know how many people out there actually shared Clark Griswold's enthusiasm with seeing it, but if you want to see it, that's exactly where it is. One thing I do think is really cool out there are the monument rocks. They are giant chalk pillars that are out there, remnants of the Great Inland Sea, which back in the Cretaceous, a good chunk of the Plain States and Texas and such were all underwater. And I just think that's really cool. I believe there's also fossil digs out there and such. And I mean, the chalk pillars themselves are essentially fossils as well. And of course, because it's a state and this country doesn't like to make a tremendous amount of sense, we also have some very strange laws. One in particular I thought was just interesting. It is illegal to hunt rabbits from a motorboat, airplane, or car unless you have a handicap permit for hunting. That is an odd combination of very specific things right there just for hunting rabbits. Also, you can't hunt ducks using mules. I don't know how you would use a mule there. Is that your transportation? Is that bait? Do they make a noise that ducks love? I don't know. Every time I do one of these, I am just left absolutely dumbfounded by some of these ridiculous laws. For example, if two trains are heading in opposite directions on a single track, they can't move until one of them has passed. Now, they're correct. They definitely can't move. How the hell do you manage to pass when there's one track? Do you go off-road? Do you wait for a tornado to just kind of wreck everything? Why was this law necessary? What the hell else are they gonna do? I don't know. I don't think there's any resolution in that. On to the next weird law. In the city of Natoma or Natoma, I'm not entirely sure, it is illegal to throw knives at men in striped suits. Any other suit, I guess it's fine. You can chuck as many knives as you want at them, but not if they're wearing striped ones, for reasons that I couldn't really find any. That's just flat out weird. And also in Wellington, you can have no more than 4 cats per household. Maybe they were onto something with the 4-cat thing, trying to keep the number of crazy cat ladies, to a minimal in the town. I don't know. I don't know the reason for a lot of these laws, but they exist. But what also exists is a small but pretty cool metal scene. And while it is a smaller scene, it's got some pretty solid bands, and one band in particular that I really wanted to talk about, and we're going to kick it off with it, is Origin, with Echoes of Decimation. Now, I'm not entirely sure if they're still from Topeka, Kansas, but at least at this point they were. This is their third album overall. This is technical, brutal death metal, and honestly one of the most savage bands I think I've ever seen live within that sort of subset. This band moves at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and oddly enough, I picked the only album without their legendary drummer John Longstreth. But I picked this one because this was the first one I got into, because the first track I ever heard by this band was the song The Burner, and that is an accurate name for that song. That is honestly an accurate name for this entire album, because everything on here is high-speed blasts, insane technical riffs that just move at a mile a minute. Having seen this band before, watching both Paul Ryan and bassist Mike Flores do their thing, it's absolutely insane to watch, especially Mike Flores. Like, his bass playing is insane. He looks like he's attacking a thing. Like, at points I was waiting for him to just start chewing on the bass. Now, while I believe this is the only album that doesn't feature John Longstreth on drums, this has James King on it, which he does an amazing job. Again, his drum work is tight. It's faster than hell. The kick speed is ridiculous, probably only rivaled by John Longstreth. But there also are a good amount of just like nasty, groovy pockets for you to just kind of like lay into and headbang. This was back when James Lee was on vocals, and his crazy vocal cadences and flips, like he's trying to almost like match the riff speed at points, and it's just absolutely insane. And yeah, I have to come back to Paul Ryan's playing because it is absolutely nuts. The Burner alone, first track I ever heard by the band, there's like 1,000 notes played in like the first 20 seconds of that song. But it doesn't come across as sloppy. It doesn't come across as like too much. It actually fits with what they're doing, which, I mean, kind of too much is their sound anyway, but they make it surprisingly very listenable. Like the blinding fast tremolos that are on Staring from the Abyss, that is some insane picking speed on there, but again, like he's still generating good riffs, good melodies. There's a lot of like more technical, brutal bands that I just don't get into because it just feels like it's just too condensed and too like on the verge of losing control, where this band feels like they are firmly in control at all times. There's also solid melodies that pop up, but a lot of this is about the technical precision and just the outright ferocity of the listen. This band probably introduced me to a lot of elements that I really grew to love over time, like, you know, gravity blasts. I don't think I ever heard a band play this fast until I listened to this album. And to be fair, there's not a tremendous amount of variety in their discography. Like, yeah, you do get like some albums that are slightly different, but Origin plays Origin, and they move at Origin speed, which, I mean, it's fast. But that's what I love about them. They are consistent, they are brutal, they are sharper than hell. I thought their last album was absolutely killer. Honestly, there isn't an album by this band that I don't like. If you are a technical, brutal death metal fan, there's a damn good chance you're already a fan of this band. But if you're not, and you have yet to actually check out any Origin, this isn't a bad place to start. But I mean, honestly, you could almost start anywhere, but I don't know, I'm going to stick with recommending this because this is an absolute banger. The Esoteric Subverter. This is the third and final album from this Lawrence, Kansas sludge/metalcore act, though this band has had like kind of an interesting history. First off, they are not to be confused with UK funeral doom legends Esoteric, completely different band. And second, they started off as a grindcore band, which I don't own any of their grind material, sadly. I didn't get into this band until their more metalcore turn with their, I believe, second album, With the Sureness of Sleepwalking, which ironically that album title sounds like the name of like 20 different metalcore bands that popped up in the mid-2000s. I thought that album was all right. It kind of felt like, you know, a Poison the Well worship act. Not terrible, but there were a lot of bands that sounded like them, and honestly, I could have just listened to Poison the Well. But I did choose to follow up that one with this one, and honestly, I like this one a lot more. This is where kind of the sludge influence starts coming in. This doesn't have as many of the like more stock metalcore riffs. There's more that kind of like lurching, bending, sludge metal sort of riff work on here, especially in the opening track, Destroy, She Said. It's more groove laden. It doesn't have like your stock, melodic metalcore breakdowns, which were definitely showing up on the other one. The atmosphere and production are different. The guitars are a little bit fuzzier and thicker. They don't have that like very metalcore crunch. And in terms of like their metalcore sound, I feel like it kind of moved away from like the more melodic metalcore sound, like, As Are They Dying, Killswitch Engage, etc. And it actually kind of went back a little bit further because there's a fair amount of stuff in here that reminds me a lot of Snapcase. Like the breakdowns have a more like old school Victory Records sort of sound at times. And when it came down to melody overall, it shared more in common with bands like Helmet and Quicksand as well. All those things still really appeal to me too. And the fact that the, vocals stayed pretty gruff and pretty harsh, even in the cleaner, more melodic sections. He's not necessarily like trying to do like the big emo-y power chorus or anything like that, which was very, very prevalent around this time because this came out in 2006. This just felt dirtier, more angsty. The breakdowns that show up on songs like Science is Sexy, it might be. Our Exquisite Corpse, Nothing Remains the Same, and one of my personal favorites on here, You Are the Execution. They're just more punchy and more vicious sounding than, again, like a lot of the metalcore that was popping up around this time. Shipyards of Foreign Cities and Don't Waste Your Guts have some cool, like more atmospheric melodies, like kind of like Cave In circa Jupiter. I like the fact that this band definitely wanted to kind of strike out on their own a little bit and, still kind of remain in the metalcore pack, but also show that, there's a little bit more variety in metalcore, than just, borrowing In Flames riffs and writing breakdowns over them. Now, sadly, this band would break up not long after this. I think the frontman is actually in a thrash metal project, but I really couldn't find much on it. And as for the other members, I'm not entirely sure, but I do still really dig this one. This is probably the only one out of at least the more metalcore years that I really like by this band. I still do want to check out their grindcore material and see what that's all about. But yeah, if you're a big fan of, again, Poison the Well, Snapcase, again, like Helmet and Quicksand, and I would even say, like, and it's a little bit more obscure reference, Johnny Truant, if anyone remembers that band from the UK years ago. Very similar to that. Check this one out. Solid listen. Thaumaturgy, Tenebrous, Oblation. This is the first full length from this one-man blackened death metal act. This one gentleman who just goes by the initials of KT lurks somewhere in Kansas. There's no specific location, which, I can kind of get because this is some of the most, like, darkest, twisted stuff I think I've ever heard come out of the state. And I'm pretty sure there's, like, a big religious population there, and they probably would, like, fucking chase him out of town if they knew he was writing this devil music. Just kidding. Kinda. Anyway, this was one of the albums that we got in a care package from Adirondack Black Mass Records. Very underground label. They gave us a lot of really cool stuff, and this one was one of the big standouts for me because this is just dark, dissonant, hellish, but also riffy as hell. Like, this combines like all the stuff that I love about bands like Morbid Angel with, that sort of extra haunting atmosphere that you get with bands like Sulphur Aeon and even to some degree bands like Portal. I'll be honest, this is probably the most evil sounding album on this entire list, and I love pretty much every second of it. While the production is definitely very gritty and very dense, it can be a little muddy at times, but the overall effects of just spiraling, twisting, dark riffs and blast beats and all the cavernous, ghoulish vocals on here, I absolutely love it. This album thrives on atmosphere, but man, there are tons of killer riffs. And if you are a big fan of like Dead Congregation, Immolation, Incantation, Cruciamentum, stuff like that, I have a feeling you're going to love this. And stay tuned because I believe this gentleman just got signed to Memento Mori Records, so hopefully there is something new coming down the pipe. Anyway, back to this album though. Lots of just menacing, sinister melodies. The dissonant atmosphere is actually used mostly in terms of like lead melodies on top of these just like slow, lumbering tremolos and like more death doomy sort of drones. They contribute to both the melody and the atmosphere at the same time, but man, it's these just absolutely dark riffs. Rites of Uncreation and Blood of Ancient Serpent, these songs are just absolutely savage. Blast beats, nasty grooves, disgusting tremolos. Everything is dense and harmonized, and like every pocket of sound feels like it is just being squeezed by this album. It does get a bit muddy, I will admit, but I mean, production aside, I think the songs are awesome. And there's some really good standouts on here, like Null Cosmic Womb, probably the most doom-laden track on the entire album. It builds the song up with like this just absolutely evil sounding atmosphere with like every single note. It sounds like the funeral for a Lovecraftian deity. And then as the song continues to build, it picks up in speed and intensity and aggression. Those slower moments are where like the evil just absolutely seeps in, especially on the last track, Withered Flesh Effigy. There's some really good doomy hooks on there. Everything about this album is just dark, foreboding, suffocatingly heavy, and hard to believe it is just one dude doing all this, but man, this is absolutely excellent. If you love any of the bands that I compared this to, I'm absolutely sure you'll dig this. Yes, the production is a little bit on the rough side, but it's not like a deal breaker. Like, you still get the overall menacing aura of this album. Strongly recommend you check it out either way, and yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what they drop for Memento Mori in the future, because this is just absolutely awesome stuff. Reform and Ruin. This is the self-titled debut EP from this Salina, Kansas metallic hardcore / metalcore act. I actually got this one years ago from my good friend Chris Grant over at Metalomania. He sent me home from our trip to Maryland with a whole bunch of killer stuff. And this was definitely one of the standouts in there, because this kind of took me back to, again, my love of like old school Victory Records style metallic hardcore. While this definitely has like bits of melody on here and like some good hooks, this is very meat and potatoes, straight in your face metallic hardcore built on groove, syncopated chugs, and just outright aggression. There's some additional flavors sprinkled in here, like 100 Words and Treadwater both have like some post-hardcore-ish melodies, or a little bit more lush. Like, you kind of get that sort of like later Cave-In effect in terms of like some of the heavy strumming and more atmospheric melodies. And then Reignite the Hearth and Face Me have, you know, some more like Lamb of God qualities, like a little bit more straightforward, you know, groove metal. The riffs are decidedly more like on the metal side than they are on the hardcore side. The vocals, though, pretty much stay like in that hardcore realm. Like, it's just a good heavy bark, like kind of similar to like, you know, Trevor Phipps from Unearth. And while there's like definitely some old school like 90s metallic hardcore vibes, there's also a fair amount of like just mid-2000s metalcore. I do like the fact that they don't just kind of like plop an At the Gates riff in like every song and kind of build around that. Like, there's a little bit more riff variety on here. It still has good, solid, hooky riffs. They're a little bit more like on the meat and tater side, but they're still effective and they're well executed. And every now and then you do get some like different stuff, like an exceptionally stupid heavy breakdown on Treadwater. I really like that. And the last track, Cycle of Lament, has some more melancholic vibes to it. Like, the melodies are decidedly more somber. It's one of those where I'd say like nothing on here really reinvents the wheel. Like, yeah, this would kind of like blend in the pack a little bit when it came down to this style, but it's well executed. I dig it. Solid riffs, solid grooves. It's meat and potatoes metallic hardcore, and I still really dig that stuff. So yeah, if you like Unearth, Hatebreed, Earth Crisis, maybe a little bit of Poison the Well too, check this one out. Pretty solid stuff. And finally, we're going to close this one out with a related one to the one I opened up with. Unmerciful, Ravenous Impulse. This is the second album from this Topeka-based brutal death metal act that, at least on this one, features former members of Origin as well as a current member of Origin. This is the only album by Unmerciful, I believe, that has John Longstreth on drums, which is interesting because I picked the only Origin album without him on drums. Either way, John Longstreth was going to get his due. But this also features two ex-members of Origin, Jeremy Turner and Clint Applehans. I'm sorry if I screwed up your name there. Both of them play guitar alongside Paul Ryan at different points, and both of them are absolutely killer guitarists. And this is similar to Origin. It is not as technical, but it is just as brutal. In fact, I would say brutality is kind of like the main thing with this band. It's blasty, it's chuggy, it's a lot of groove on it, but it is more focused on just delivering just absolutely brutal, savage riffs rather than trying to dazzle you with a lot of technical parts. That isn't to say this doesn't have its techie moments, but for the most part, This thing is just absolutely savage from front to back. Baseline, I would just call it like brutality at light speed. Now this is one that I recently picked up. This was one I got earlier this year when I was down in Florida, and I've been meaning to actually get some Unmerciful stuff because I had heard some of it. I was like, dude, that's pretty savage. Kind of sounds a bit like Origin, except less techy. Oh, that's why. But I dug the hell out of it. And it does some things that are a little bit like atypical of brutal death metal. Like the vocal delivery on here is not what you would expect of brutal death metal. It's not like the deep gurgly vocals you'd hear from like a John Gallagher. They're more mid-register roars, and he's honestly pretty damn clear. There are some moments where he goes a little bit lower, but overall it's just this rapid fire intense attack that matches up with the rapid fire intense attack of this album, because this album is on attack at all times. The riffs are constantly swarming around you. The picking speed on here is just absolutely insane when it comes on guitars. I'd be surprised if, like, you know, all of them don't have arthritis by now. But when you're keeping up with Longstreth and his absolutely crazy footwork, I think that's necessary. Like, you have to let your fucking wrists suffer for the metal. But yeah, this album is just absolutely packed full of just killer songs in here. Habitual Savagery, Kingdom of Serpents, the last track being a just flat out nasty instrumental, Methodic Absolution. One of my favorite tracks of the album, not only because it kind of takes a break from the just insane amount of blasting on here, it's a little bit more groove laden. There's also some really good haunting melodies and like really solid harmonized riffs on that one. The rest of this album can be an absolute blur of just outright brutal music, but at the same time I find it very engaging because the riff work in here, again, it's like very intricate, but it doesn't come across as like overtly technical. Like it still feels like it's rooted in good hooks, and it kind of feels like more along the lines of like, you know, Blood Red Throne at times, or like an even more aggressive version of Cannibal Corpse, if you can imagine that. And while this does maintain a very intense pace throughout, I like the fact that there are like really clever riff changes and like just solid transitions on here to keep the songs interesting. Like they're not just like one note brutal songs that are just, you know, play as fast and as heavy as you can. There's fun nuance to it. And yeah, I need to get more Unmerciful. I think they have 2 other albums. I definitely want to hunt them down. This was just an absolute beast of a listen. If you're a big fan of, I mean, Origin to a degree, I'll definitely say that, but also Cannibal Corpse, God, I would say like Suffocation at points, Dying Fetus. There's some Cryptopsy-esque flair to some of this too. Just check this album out. Absolutely killer stuff. And that will do it for Kansas. I know, another short one. I got another pretty short one coming up, and then we're going to get to one that has a little bit more in the way of bands. But again, I kind of wanted to dig in these states where, again, you don't necessarily expect there to be that much of a scene. And in some cases, there really isn't one. But there's still some awesome bands to check out there, and I definitely want to put like a little bit of a highlight on them. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also now have memberships. They're only 99 cents, and we do a members only live stream every now and then for our members. That's our lone perk there. We're trying to make them a little bit more different than our standard live streams, you know, having like an actual topic to discuss in those, and, you know, give you guys a chance to get like, you know, a little bit more one-on-one with us. We also have some really dumb emojis, which I'm going to eventually add some more dumb emojis. And yeah, this is the new way to support the channel more directly, as we're trying to get away from Patreon. We still have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with our t-shirts and hats too. That is linked down below in the video description. And if you are interested in joining the channel and becoming a member, there is a join button just down below this video. But whether you join or not, know that we appreciate the hell out of you guys. It has been amazing doing this for 6 years now. It's pretty damn crazy. It has been an amazing run, and that is large in part to you guys. Tons of stuff coming up on the channels. We're going to get back to rankings, retro reviews, and a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, stay tuned for what is likely going to be another busy year at Thralls. So one more big thank you, because you guys are awesome, and we will catch you later.